given vouchers for a replacement trip of our choice, but without the usual background checks having to take place. So we were in the state-run travel agency for youth tourism, looking at the enormous map of the Soviet Union. Everything was, of course, marked in red. I strained to see which part of the Soviet Union was located near the Caucasus, as our plan was to escape via Turkey. On the map, Azerbaijan looked pretty close, and from Baku, the capital, it seemed just like a few mountains and a bit of Iran separated it from Turkey. It was a crazy idea. Via Moscow, we flew to Baku and then took a train 400 kilometers to the border. We hid in a canyon and waited for nightfall. The landscape was surreal. A full moon shone and the mountains were bare, no trees, no bushes. We came out of our hiding place and started to crawl forwards very slowly on our stomachs. We'd left our rucksacks at a small cemetery earlier on. So there we were, on the other side of the world, in the vicinity of China, crawling like ants down the mountainside. We were expecting to encounter soldiers at any moment, so continued to crawl on our stomachs. Really slowly, with lots of breaks to assess the situation. It went on like this for hours. Exhausted, I nodded off, only to be woken by the distant sound of a barking dog and Tim shaking my shoulders. On we continued until we came to a little settlement that had hedges, fences, and lamppost huts, no obvious signs of border installations. It seemed like the place was deserted, but we couldn't be sure a soldier wasn't hiding somewhere in the dark. Then dogs started barking, first one, then another. We stood up and started running until we came to a canal. We'd seen on the map that the river Aras formed the border with Iran and presumed the canal would flow into the river. We jumped into the canal and started wading through the water. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a man appeared with a German shepherd dog on a lead, violently barking at us from the banks of the canal. I called out to him, "Did you have a good party last night? Oops, it seems I had too much to drink." It happened to be the 9th of May, the Soviet national holiday celebrating the victory over fascism in Europe. The man stared furiously back at us, trying to make sense of the situation. A woman in trousers, wading in the water in the vicinity of the border area in the middle of the night. He'd really seen it all now. I shouted, "Tim, run!" We ran out of the water and over a wire fence into a garden, trampling over bushes and flowers to the far end where a gate opened onto a railway embankment. A short distance away, behind a series of barbed wire fences, was the brightly illuminated border area. We gave each other a short look and nodded. Without hesitating, we started running towards the barbed wire fences and managed to get through the first one. Don't ask me how. Tim pulled the barbed wire apart with his bare hands while I crawled through the gap he'd made. He followed after me when I was through, on to the next fence. Pieces of my pullover and trousers were ripped off by the barbed wire. Our hands were bleeding. Between fences 3 and 4 was a raked area of sand where, without realizing it, we must have set off a security alarm. We jumped over the anti-tank barriers and reached the winding wire fence whose matrix of wires tightened when you move one piece. I have no idea how I got through it. At one moment my hips got stuck in the wire and Tim heaved and pushed me until suddenly I landed on the other side. Tim's pullover got caught in the fence, but somehow he managed to free himself and get through. I turned around briefly and took in the brightly lit border area with its numerous barbed wire fences and saw Tim's pullover fluttering in the wind like a little flag on the last fence. After a few minutes, we reached an open field. It was dimly lit, with deep furrows of wet mud. It seemed to go on forever, and there was no sign of a river anywhere. We continued running, the clumps of mud sticking to to our shoes, I fell down. "Don't stop! Keep going, Tim," I shouted. He stopped and helped me to my feet. Moaning, I reminded him that we'd agreed that if one of us fell down, the other one should continue alone. At the end of the field was a small ditch, which I didn't see in the dark. I fell face first into the mud. I pulled myself together and wiped my eyes. My feet were covered in thick mud, and each step I took became more difficult. Ahead of us was a thick thorn bush, enormous branches and thorns like some kind of subtropical plant. Only the lower 20 centimeters of the bush had no thorns. We crawled underneath on our stomachs. Suddenly, I heard shots ring out and saw light flares rocketing up into the sky above our heads. In front of us was another small barbed wire fence placed through the middle of the thorn bushes. With the last bit of energy I had, I climbed over it and then helped Tim over too. Still no sign of a river anywhere. Out of nowhere, a German shepherd dog suddenly appeared by my side, panting and staring attentively at me, its tongue hanging out, his ears standing up. I dread to think what it would have done if I'd tried to move. Tim crawled up behind me and whispered, "How do you say, 'Call off your dog' in Russian?" I didn't reply, just waited and gave the dog a look of total contempt. A few moments later, the soldiers were at our side. They tied our hands with leather bands together and called the dog back. I started to curse and shouted in Russian, "Let us go, you swine! Is this what you call communism?" They pulled us out of the bushes and brought us back to the open field. I lost my balance and fell in the ditch again. A young soldier pulled me up until I was on my feet again. An officer shouted, "Go on, kiss the earth of your motherland." I was covered in mud from head to foot and consumed by hatred. "Never," I replied. I promptly received a blow in the back of my neck from a rifle butt. I fell once more face first into the mud and lay there motionless, unable to move for what seemed like an eternity. When I finally moved my head to the side, I caught a glimpse of Tim's face and started to get frightened. I felt the cold metallic sensation of a machine gun running down my neck, and I heard the sound of it being loaded, although it took me a while to register what was happening. At the same time, an officer barked at Tim, "Go on, you too." Tim didn't understand a word. He just stood there and stared at me. From below I croaked, "He doesn't understand your language. We're not Russians." From that moment onwards, everything went fairly smoothly. They lowered their weapons, put us into jeeps, and started talking on the phone about the 2 Englishmen they'd just arrested. They brought us to their command center. They had never had such an incident before, so they didn't even have a cell to put us in. While I was interrogated, Tim had to spend a day and a half locked up in the staff toilet under constant guard. I have to admit the guards were pretty friendly. They brought me tea and fresh clothes, although they stared at me like some kind of strange, exotic animal.